Product number 3, or P.N.03 as we'll call it, was a third-person shooter released in 2003, developed by Capcom's in-house development Studio 4 and directed by Shinji Mikami of Resident Evil and Dino Crisis fame. P.N.03 was the first planned installment of the now infamous Capcom 5, a partnership deal gone wrong that you could write a whole essay on by itself. To very briefly summarize for the uninitiated, the Capcom 5 is a collaboration between Capcom and its longtime partner Nintendo to make 5 exclusive games for its financially struggling GameCube. The plan was announced to the public in November of 2002 at a press conference held by Capcom, where they revealed the initiative and the first 5 games that would make up the deal. These were P.N.03, Beautiful Joe, Dead Phoenix, Resident Evil 4, and Killer 7. While at first this lineup may have seemed promising, especially the surprise of a numbered Resident Evil game not being on a PlayStation console, it soon became a little more suspect. IGN asked Capcom USA for clarification on the exclusivity, and a representative confirmed this. However, in January of 2003, around 2 months after the initial reveal, Capcom USA retracted the confirmation. They claimed it was a miscommunication with Capcom Japan, and that only Resident Evil 4 was to remain a GameCube exclusive. Upon its initial Japanese release in March of that year, P.N.03's poor sales led to Capcom getting cold feet over the whole thing. And by cold feet, I mean canceling Dead Phoenix, giving PlayStation 2 ports to Beautiful Joe and Killer 7, and putting Resident Evil 4 on nearly every console under the sun. More than likely due to its commercial failure, selling under 11,000 units at launch, P.N.03 would be the only member of the Capcom 5 to remain a GameCube exclusive. Well, that was a downer to start on, so let's get ourselves back on track and talk about some of the behind-the-scenes details. The goal of P.N.03 was apparently to make a game that was both fun to watch and play, with the stylish animations providing player feedback and visual eye candy. Early on in development, gameplay apparently looked too similar to Capcom's most recent action hit Devil May Cry, so the combat design was shifted from an offensive playstyle to a more defensive one. The shift to defensive play led, somehow, to the implementation of the dance-inspired combat that the game's protagonist engages in. Guns were also supposed to be the primary weapons used, but due to time constraints, they couldn't be animated in, and the team opted for these funky hand energy blasts instead. Just an aside, I'm kinda glad that they didn't put guns in the game. The way the energy attacks are fired gives the game a more unique aesthetic and personality. In P.N.03, you take control of the high-tech mercenary and flashy dancer Vanessa Z. Schneider, who takes a job from an anonymous faceless client to go beat up a bunch of maverick robots called cams. After the initial setup, there really isn't much more to the vast majority of the game. Vanessa and the client have some back and forth and text-only conversations, but these short exchanges are mostly used to give objectives to the player and tease upcoming bosses. There are bits of existential intrigue later on, but the story is bare bones and very much on the back burner. Hell, Vanessa herself doesn't even speak until about 2/3 of the way through the game, and she's the only voiced character here. The soundtrack for P.N.03 is actually pretty damn good. It's jam-packed with upbeat, almost jazzy electronic, which serves as pretty great background music for the action and helps keep the player in the rhythm of the combat. Not a music guy though, so that's the extent of my evaluative abilities here. The animation work here is also very solid. Enemies telegraph their attacks clearly, a must for an action game like this, but the real highlight is Vanessa's movements. Every action the player can take, from the dodges, jumps, crawling, to even her idle stances, gives us the personality that she otherwise lacks in the story. We can tell from how she drums her fingers along to the music and incorporates dancing into her fighting style that Vanessa is cool, confident, and likes what she does. Just like a certain other sassy Capcom protagonist around this period.
What a big surprise. I hope for your sake you got something inside that big body of yours.
It's nothing outstanding or anything, but it's a nice touch. With that out of the way, let's get to the real draw of the game, how the thing actually plays. P.N.03 is a third-person shooter released before Mikami's own Resident Evil 4, meaning that it lacks the over-the-shoulder manual aim which that game popularized, if not invented. Instead, we have to make do with a zoomed-out, behind-the-back camera where players need to rely on the auto-aim to target enemies. It works for the most part, though swapping between multiple targets can be a bit of a pain, especially when enemy shields are introduced. The control scheme of the game is somewhat similar to what we'd see in RE4 and God Hand, as the player controls Vanessa through tank controls. Now, while this might be a turnoff for some, tank controls can work extremely well when implemented correctly, but I'll admit they can be a touch awkward in P.N.03. They take getting used to, but you can get used to them. It's not like they're outright broken or anything. The button layout, in contrast, is itself very simple and easy to get the hang of. A shoots, B jumps, Z quick turns, X changes your targets, and the left and right triggers are used to dodge in the corresponding directions. The simplicity of the moveset makes P.N.03 a very easy game to pick up and play. What isn't easy to just pick up and play around with is the camera, which is largely static behind the player character, but can be switched around to slightly different POVs. And I do stress slightly, as I didn't find the alter perspectives to help with the general visibility issue the game can have. Faster enemies which can move around to the side of your view can be hard to reposition on screen, and getting them back within auto-aim range can be difficult due to how slow the turn speed is, and the tank controls paired with it makes turning your absolute worst enemy in this game. When the wrong enemy is around a corner, it can just become a straight up death trap provided you're not careful. You have two forms of attack in P.N.03. The regular shot has infinite ammo and is fired by either mashing or holding A depending on which suit you're wearing. The suits are the draw of the game's storefront, which you can purchase with the points you accumulate in-game from good performance. They all have their ups and downs, with better attack power, defense, or the ability to hold A for a faster fire rate, and can all be upgraded for optimal use. The suits all have unique special moves from one another, which provides the player with their second offensive option. Special moves are overclocked attacks that can absolutely decimate both regular enemies and bosses in some cases, which can only be performed if the player's MP bar has enough points and are executed by inputting a command into the D-pad. Now, this is probably just because I'm casual filth when it comes to P.N.03, but I actually had some trouble putting the D-pad commands in, especially in the heat of the moment. You could say that it adds to the challenge, but hammering them out while dodging attacks and trying to mash out A to get some regular attacks in is just too much of a hassle for my money. The levels and the level design itself are weak, as many areas of the game are wholesale repeated, those that aren't look identical to almost every other one, and they're just straight lines for the player to run through, providing few branches or level design related challenges. The ramrod straight corridors remind me a bit of Final Fantasy XIII, since most of the time you're just walking forward through repetitious hallways. Before moving on, I do acknowledge that the level design was very clearly not the focus of development for P.N.03, but a counter to that comes from another Shinji Mikami game, the prior mentioned God Hand. While God Hand had extremely linear level design, each of the 8 worlds provided its own visual style to set itself apart from all the others. It wasn't vital, God Hand would still be just as much of a kick-ass game without it, but a little visual variety is always welcome. The focus of P.N.03's gameplay is most certainly its combat, and it's the thing you'll spend the vast majority of the game engaging in. P.N.03 can be labeled as an arcade-style shoot-'em-up, where the goal is to get from the start of the stage to the very end, killing all of the enemies in your way before taking on the level's boss. The game provides a decent variety of enemies for the player to fight, and paces them well. You won't be encountering the tougher foes until around the midpoint of the game, and you're eased into the more challenging ones. The difficulty for the game is also very well handled, as it's a rather punishing game, but a generally fair one. Except for that final boss who's a cheating bitch. P.N.03 has a life system like many older games, though, which is personally something I could have done without. The dodging is the key cornerstone of the whole game, as defensive play is rewarded above offensive. Upon first playing, taking everything head on resulted in me getting my ass kicked, but as I eased into a more reactive playstyle, the game rewarded my patience. You can dodge either left or right, and each dodge can be performed twice in each direction before a cooldown animation. The timing, while an adjustment at first, is actually incredibly generous. The dodge can also cancel out of shooting, and the enemy attacks are very well telegraphed with visual and audio cues. It's challenging to learn all the little quirks of the design, such as when exactly to dodge for which enemy attack, but it can be done and it's a fair task. The player's performance is graded from room to room, with tallied results ranging from damage taken, enemies killed, and total time to complete. At the end of each level, you're given an overall grading, though the higher ranks are somewhat hard to discern for one another. What exactly is the difference between Professional and Destroyer, for instance? Not clear at a glance. Better performance nets the player more points, which as mentioned earlier can be used as currency to buy items if you're casual, or suits and upgrades to move along your chosen progression path. Additional currency is also earned by maintaining a high combo in a room. The combo system works as expected, but there's one little quirk which stood out to me. You get one additional notch on the combo for each enemy killed, but the real trick is that the combo timer is relative. You see, if you were to kill a weak enemy, the countdown timer until your combo runs out is shorter, usually 5 seconds or so. Kill a stronger enemy, then the timer is about 12 seconds. I think this little change is genius, because if the combo had a set countdown timer for each enemy, then there wouldn't be much pressure to push forward, as you'd have more than enough time to take out a group of weak ones and get a high combo. As is, P.N.03 is constantly pushing the player to take out enemies as fast as they possibly can, while doing so stylishly to ensure that they take no damage and get the bonus points given for clearing a room unscathed. Rooms on average can be completed in under a minute, and each of the 11 chapters can be cleared in approximately 10 to 15 minutes each. Needless to say, P.N.03 is very short, and clearly designed around replaying to master the game's mechanics and achieve the highest score possible. This is where its arcade-style roots show the most clearly, and if you're not the kind of person who enjoys replaying games, then this is most certainly going to be a deal-breaker. This very short runtime, paired with the amount of repeating content, make it understandable why someone would be upset about paying $60 for it back in 2003. The minimum length of games in relation to their price is a can of worms that I really don't feel like touching today, so I'll just say that with the benefit of not having to pay full retail price for a new copy, I personally was not too bothered by the duration of P.N.03 and how it's based around replays. But on the topic of repeating content, if there's anything that I don't particularly care for, it's the bosses. They're not bad, mind you, as they're still testing your grasp on the game's combat and evasive systems well enough, but you fight the vast majority of them twice within the same arenas, and occasionally without any new attacks to even alter the fight in the slightest. It's very clearly the result of a rushed development period, and it's a damn shame that a bad spot like it had to mar an otherwise very fun and unique combat system. And even with that on the table, and all the other issues taken into account, P.N.03 is a game that just clicked with me. It's the kind of thing that's more than the sum of its parts. When the music gets going, you see Vanessa's animations almost matching it, and you've gotten yourself into the rhythm of dodging and countering enemies without a hitch, the whole thing just feels right. I think a lot of the appeal for it has to do with the heavy emphasis on defensive play, which is something that few other action games would do. Putting defensive over offensive was a smart choice, and whoever on the development team came up with that made a great decision, as it helps make P.N.03 stand out from the crowd. P.N.03 is a one-of-a-kind kind of game, though an extremely flawed one. It can easily become unbearably repetitive, the A button mashing is extreme, and the recycled content only furthers this. On the whole though, I greatly enjoyed my time with it for the reasons listed beforehand. Despite being an infamous flop, P.N.03's style lives on through titles from Platinum Games to some degree. The robot designs seen here bear resemblance to those found in a lot of their own games, like Metal Gear Rising for one example. Vanessa's dance move inspired combat could have been an influence on Bayonetta and her fighting style, and both this and Nier Automata have high-tech robot-filled worlds with protagonists who are completely stacked and tacked. That last one might be a bit of a stretch. However, a more direct link can be found in one of Platinum's games, as Shinji Mikami's Vanquish, which he directed with the developer, acts as something of a spiritual successor to P.N.03. It was apparently a chance for Mikami to make the game he wanted to make originally, using concepts saved from P.N.03's cutting room floor. A friend of mine, Wes, over at Recommended Playing, already covered that one, and I basically agree with everything he had to say there, so give that a watch for a take on the spiritual successor to this fun little cult classic.